think we can kick off now. Let's try and stick to timelines here. So, good morning, everyone, to back in the UK, and good afternoon to all our panelists who are here in the UAE on the other end. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on this session. In this specific workshop, we'll be covering a few topics around opportunities and considerations in the UAE, and we're going to focus on the energy infrastructure and utilities sector. We have a great range of speakers joining us today, and what I will do now is now essentially run you through the agenda, the running order for the day. So it will be myself. I'm Vinita, and I work with the British Centers for Business here in the UAE. I will be elaborating on who we are and what we do shortly. Among our speakers, we have Ewan McKinnon today, who is the energy sector specialist here with the Department for International Trade and stationed in the UAE. We also have Akin Adamson join us from Ricardo Energy and Engineering, who will be focusing on some of the major projects in the utilities sector, and followed by James, who will be talking us through some of the company setup structures, also this constant conversation we have around Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and also some practical pointers around what it takes to set up business in this part of the world. We will then take the Q&A session. We will then take a few questions in the Q&A session at the end of the presentation from all the speakers. And I will be moderating this session, and I will be inviting our speakers to take some of those questions depending on their areas of expertise. So that's a quick snapshot of our pictures. Some of them may not match what we look like now, especially in my case. This was taken back in the day, but so that's us, and we will be sharing all of the details of the speakers as well as the session. Just a quick few house rules that I want to share right away. This session is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording of this entire session along with the deck that will be presented today. This will be a 1 hour long session with 45 minutes to maximum 50 minutes that will be allotted to the speakers. And we will take the last 5 to 10 minutes for questions. We usually do have a spillover of about 5 to 10 minutes, but we'll try and keep it as tight as possible today. There will also be a feedback form that will be sent to all the attendees. So please take out 2 minutes of your time and fill it out and send it, not send it back to us, just submit it, and we will be able to see it. So without any further delay, just a quick overview on who we are, the British Centers for Business. And we will start off with the latest on COVID situation here in the UAE. So we have had about 1,000 plus new cases over the last couple of weeks. There's about a little over 16,000 active cases, and less than 600 fatalities in total. Um, I think the most important update is obviously the UK UAE travel corridor that was announced a couple of weeks ago, which simply means that the quarantine requirements have now been relaxed a little bit when we travel between the UK and the UAE. Uh, and it is obviously a bit easier to travel to Dubai rather than it is to Abu Dhabi. So just a quick reminder on that one. We have been partners, the delivery partners for the Department for International Trade since 2016. Just some numbers, stats and figures there. We're inching quite quickly to the 100 million pound mark there in terms of some of the export wins that we have facilitated over the last few works. So quite excited about that. Obviously, we'll make a song and dance about it when we hit the 100 million mark. But that's just a few numbers and figures there for you to take a look at. Abby, next slide, please. We work quite closely with the Department of International Trade, like I mentioned earlier, but we also work with the devolves quite closely. So Scottish Development International, SDI, Santander, the British Business Group, the Welsh government, who are also one of our active participants for this specific virtual trade mission, in addition to INI and the British Chambers of Commerce. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of the activities that we've undertaken within the construction sector and related sectors over the last year or so. I mean, what we have seen is, interestingly, a 30% jump in the number of inquiries from construction and related industries over the last year. And I think that's not too surprising, given the fact that, there was a lot of Brexit was looming, and obviously a lot of UK exporters are now looking to see what else is out there. So we've seen a reasonably considerable jump in terms of interest in this market. And we have undertaken a fair amount of work for a lot of UK companies in the past who are looking to the UAE as a potential export market. Again, happy to share more information at a later time. Next slide, Abby. So that's just a quick snapshot of some of the services that we offer to UK companies who are looking to enter the UAE. Anything and everything from B2B introductions all the way through to event management, through to trade mission support that we provide as part of our trade services. And another remit of the work that we do is to provide incubator services as well for companies who are looking for a sort of a soft launch into the UAE. Next slide, Abby. So this is a sort of a unique structure that we have managed to organize, set up. So you essentially, the companies essentially get a 5 years, soft landing opportunity with us, where BCB takes on a fair amount of legwork in setting up companies specifically in Dubai. And I'll let James talk about that a little later when he talks about setting up in Dubai and Abu Dhabi as well. Next slide. So this is just a quick snapshot of the fact that we work quite closely, not just with the UK Department for International Trade, but obviously also with the local government. We partnered with the Dubai government, and we are a certified incubator, wherein we have been welcomed with open arms, because we've been responsible for a fair amount of inward investment into the UAE as well. So therefore, the sort of the love that we receive from Dubai FDI on that front. And that's the team. We're a fairly big team. We're about 13 of us here. Like you can see, 85 plus years of combined GCC experience. And then you can see it's quite a diverse team, as you'd find here in the UAE, 7 different languages spoken amongst the 13 of us, with offices here in the UAE, in Dubai, but also back in London and Belfast. Next slide. We're part of OCO Global, and therefore our offices in London and Belfast. We're headquartered in Belfast, and we have offices across the globe, so to speak. We're partnered with the DIT in North America as well. So if there are other markets that you would like to explore, we have the capability to do so as well. So that's very, very quickly what we do and who we are and how we got involved in this workshop. I will now pass on to Ewan. Like I mentioned in the beginning, he's the energy specialist with the Department for International Trade here in the UAE, and also takes care of the region as well. And he will be talking about specifically about the sector and some of the initiatives in this region, and how companies can make most of the initiatives around this specific sector. Over to you, Ewan.
Hi, thanks, Rita. Just check, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, good afternoon and good morning to those of you dialing in from the UK. I hope you and your loved ones are safe and well during these unprecedented times. As already said, my name's Ewan McKinven. I'm the Department for International Trade's Middle East Regional Energy Specialist based in the British Embassy, Abu Dhabi. It's great to be participating in today's webinar. Thanks again to the BCB for hosting us. Now, this is a rather large topic area with multiple subsectors. So my task is to provide an overview of some key considerations for you, and I'll be happy to take any questions at the end. I'll also leave my contact details on the last slide, so please feel free to contact me anytime. Next slide, please. So, formed in 1971, the UAE is made up of 7 emirates: Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Sharjah, Fujairah, Ajman, Al Quwain, and Ras Al Khaimah. It's the second biggest market in the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, which is comprised of the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar. I should highlight that DIT has an energy lead based in each of these countries, should they also be on your radar, and I'll provide their contact details at the end as well. The current population of the UAE is around 9.5 million, of which roughly 2.8 million are Emirati. So with over 7 million non-Emirati residents, the UAE is heavily reliant on the expat workforce. As a very young country celebrating its 49th birthday just last week, the UAE is continuously learning and changing as it seeks to develop its economy and build a solid local supply chain, especially in light of the economic impact from COVID-19 and low oil price. This continuous change is something that is very evident when seeking to do business in the country, something I'm sure Pro-Partner Group will touch on shortly. Now, it's a common misconception that Dubai and Abu Dhabi operate as a united front. Although there is, of course, a degree of cooperation at a national federal level, both Emirates operate significantly independently at an Emirates level. Key examples of this could be Emirates and Etihad Airlines, separate state pension funds, separate local government and municipal governments, and the energy sector is no different, with individual Emirates having their own electricity, water, and gas authorities. It could be argued that Abu Dhabi is the energy capital of the UAE, with the national oil company ADNOC being based there. However, when it comes to utilities and renewable energy developments, I'd say it's a relatively even split, and Akin will be talking in more detail about specific projects after this. As governments in the Middle East start investing in cleaner futures, we are increasingly finding common ground between the UK's industrial and energy strategy priorities and the vision strategies of the Gulf. Like that of hydrocarbons, the Gulf has abundant renewable resources, offering the region the opportunity to dramatically reduce its carbon footprint. The UAE is making impressive progress with ambitious targets set out in its Vision 2021 and Energy Strategy 2050. Saudi Arabia too has set renewable energy targets as part of its Vision 2030 strategy. Meanwhile, Qatar is progressing towards the greenest FIFA World Cup ever, aligned to the development of its national Vision 2030. In 2017, the UAE launched its Energy Strategy 2050, which is considered to be the first unified energy strategy in the country that is based on supply and demand. The strategy aims to increase the contribution of clean energy in the total energy mix from 25 to 50% by 2050 and reduce the carbon footprint of power generation by 70%, saving 700 billion dirhams by 2050. It also seeks to increase consumption efficiency of individuals and corporates by 40%. The strategy targets an energy mix that combines renewable, nuclear, and clean energy resources to meet the UAE's economic requirements and environmental goals. It's broken down as follows: 44% from renewable energy, 38% from gas, 12% from clean coal, and 6% from nuclear. The UAE government is going to great lengths to encourage energy efficiency and green energy alternatives in the UAE, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, following the drop in oil price and impact of COVID-19 on the economy. It aims to drop the share of power generation from gas from 98% in 2012 to less than 76% in 2021. To do so, the government is moving to renewable energy resources. For example, the UAE began building a nuclear power plant back in 2013, successfully connecting it to the grid this year, and is operating some of the world's largest solar energy facilities in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Masdar in Abu Dhabi, which is the UAE's leading developer and operator of utility-scale renewable energy projects, is a large investor in the UK as well, investing in offshore wind developments and electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Now, when looking at utilities, for the most part in the UAE, they are distributed and supplied through public authorities that the government partially subsidises. These state owned entities have exclusive rights to purchase and distribute electricity in the UAE, although only within their particular areas of operation. In Abu Dhabi, domestic electricity and water supplies are provided exclusively through the Abu Dhabi Distribution Company, ADDC. Similarly, the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority, known as DEWA, is the sole distributor of domestic electricity and water supplies in Dubai. These same agencies also regulate the industries. When it comes to water, the UAE government is making concerted efforts to secure its water supplies and make them sustainable for the future. With water coming solely through desalinated seawater and groundwater, the UAE announced its Water Security Strategy 2036, which includes the introduction of different tariff bands to reduce wastage, one for green usage and others for higher, less environmentally friendly usage. Another aspect of the strategy is to identify sustainable desalination solutions, dams, and rainwater harvesting projects. A really good example of recent UK company success in this area can be found in Desolinator and Solar Water UK, who have both gained significant interest in the region, winning multiple contracts with their innovative solar powered desalination technology that provides a solution to current and important problems. Another area that has become a key focus in the UAE in recent years is waste management and waste to energy. Now, the UAE has one of the highest per capita waste generation rates in the world as a result of its rapid economic expansion. Over the past few years, there has been a positive change in attitude and a better understanding of the need to manage waste in a scientific manner. Respective waste management authorities and agencies have ramped up efforts for sustainable waste management, very much in line with the strategic vision of the government to achieve the ultimate goal of zero waste to landfill. Each emirate has its own development plan and ambitious targets, however, they are all aligned to the UAE National Agenda 2021. The vision sets out to divert 75% of all waste generated away from landfills through a policy of reusing, recycling, or other types of advanced treatment, and to generate 27% of its energy requirements from clean sources, including nuclear power, by 2021. Furthermore, the UAE government aims to invest 600 billion dirhams by 2050 to meet the growing energy demand and ensure sustainable growth for the country's economy. So, with all of that said, I'm sure there are many companies on the call whose products and services cut across various sectors and subsectors. So, I wanted to include this current slide that we're on that highlights the sectors covered by DIT across the region, just for reference. I hope that based on what I've just said, that you've picked up a strong sense of the direction that the UAE is looking to take and the regular themes of progression, sustainability, innovation. And I strongly believe the UK has a key role to play in helping the UAE to achieve their goals. However, with that said, the market is saturated and highly competitive, particularly when it comes to cost. As the government seeks to diversify and build its domestic supply chain through innovation and technology, more and more pressure is being placed on companies to commit to the market longer term. So, what solutions do you offer that makes your business stand out? Whether you are new to the UAE or already have a presence and are looking to grow your business, my advice when speaking on these platforms is always this: use the strong network that is available to you here in the UAE and across the region. As Vanita highlighted earlier on, it may be the DIT, it might be BCB, Scottish Development International, Welsh Government, Invest Northern Ireland. Whoever it is, please use us to help you navigate this sometimes tricky market. We are here to help soften the landing and hopefully reduce the various pitfalls that do exist. Last slide, please. So, yeah, as promised at the beginning, here are my contact details in green, as well as DIT's regional energy sector leads, in case you have your eyes set on other Middle East markets as well. Thank you very much, and I look forward to taking any questions at the end.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Ewan, and certainly gives us a sense of how committed the UAE is, as a matter of fact, in the sense, wanting to diversify away from its oil-based economy and focus more and more on renewable energy and cleaner energy sources going forward. So thanks for that. Okay, moving on. We are now going to have Akin on board, who will speak to us a little bit more about some very specific projects in not just in the UAE but also in the region. Akin is, like I mentioned, the director and leads the business for Ricardo in the region. Over to you, Akin.
Thank you very much, Vanita, and welcome to everybody on the webinar this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. So it's a pleasure to be joining you, and thank you to the organisers for inviting me to participate. Next slide, please. Skip forward a couple of slides, actually. Yeah, so I'll spend the next 10 or 15 minutes or so just running you through very quickly, perhaps first of all, who Ricardo Energy Environment are and where we've come from. We'll take a quick look at some of the large-scale utilities projects that are happening in the UAE right now. We'll also look at some of the alternative projects, and Ewan hinted at waste to energy being one area which is sort of on the rise at the moment, and we've done some work in that space, so I'll say a few words about that, and then finally we'll conclude with a short summary. So for those of you that are not familiar with Ricardo, we're actually a very old UK company that's been around for just over 100 years. It's actually with a heritage in the automotive sector, so developing everything from engines for First World War tanks right up to the present day, where we develop the gearbox for the Bugatti Veyron. So you can see there's a huge variety of kind of engineering skills there. But around about 10 years ago, Ricardo made a couple of strategic acquisitions, which have been very important for us over the last decade. The first was to diversify into rail, and Ricardo acquired the Lloyd's Rail certification and engineering business, and that business actually works across the GCC as well. We work on most of the major rail programs in Saudi, in Qatar, in the UAE. But Ricardo also acquired AEA Technologies, and AEA stands for the Atomic Energy Authority Technologies, which is an ex-UK government centre of excellence for sustainable energy and environmental consulting, which was established around about 65 years ago, and semi-privatized in 1995. So next slide, please. So Ricardo Energy Environment is what became of AEA Technologies, and we provide a portfolio of services covering all the major aspects of sustainability and environmental consulting. So these include energy, water, waste, air quality, sustainable transport, and policy. So our client base includes a whole raft of international government and private sector businesses. We as a business, Ricardo Energy Environment, are headquartered in Oxfordshire, and we have around about 450 scientists and technical staff globally. Next slide, please. So one of those teams, as I mentioned, is our energy team, who work for public and private sector clients, largely to identify and implement the right policies, plans, and projects. So a team of around about 50 people. We have a business that works with the transmission arms of energy companies, so developing innovative smart grid solutions. We also have a fairly wide renewable energy team that is able to assess and evaluate different renewable energy schemes. So in the UK, for example, we work for the UK government assessing which technologies would meet the requirements for receiving subsidies. So again, in order to do that, you need to have a very detailed understanding of all the technologies that are available. We also internationally have a transaction advisory business that supports governments and private sectors in investments they're making in new power projects, and we do, as I say, we do a lot of that work overseas and outside of the UK. Next slide, please. Okay, so now looking specifically at the UAE. So what I've done, I've split the UAE essentially into two parts. One is Abu Dhabi, which, as Ewan said, is kind of the driving force really of the UAE, and then we'll look at some of the projects that sit in Dubai and some of the other Emirates as well. So the entity responsible for energy and water generation in Abu Dhabi in the Northern Emirates is called EWEC, or the Emirates Water and Electricity Company, and rather conveniently they list on their website the facilities they've currently got online, but also some of the new ones that are coming online as well. So I won't go through all of the facilities that they've got our existing capabilities, but I will just touch and say a few words on the new ones. And again, Ewan has mentioned a couple of these. So first of all is the Baraka nuclear power plant, which started being commissioned in 2012. It's now complete, so it's in the kind of high 90% of being complete. 4 nuclear reactors built by KEPCO, which is a Korean company. Nuclear fission started in Unit 1 in July of this year and achieved a state of criticality in August of this year. And the whole site is due to go online throughout the course of 2021. And that will provide a huge boost to the energy generation capacity of Abu Dhabi. In addition to that, there's also the Taweelah plant, and you can see there's already 3 Taweelah plants already commissioned. The 4th one will be again about 50 kilometers north of Abu Dhabi, cost around about $900 million US. Is expected to be complete in the next couple of years, so 2022. And the EPC contractor for that one is Abengoa and Power China. So that will be both a combined cycle gas turbine plant and also a reverse osmosis desalination plant as well. The 3rd new project is the Fujairah F3 power project. And again, there's a couple of Fujairah projects already online. The new one will bring online about 2.4 gigawatts of gas-fired combined cycle power. I think EWET received 6 bids for the project back in 2019 and was eventually won by a consortium, Abu Dhabi Power and Marubeni, who I think were awarded that in around about February of this year. Signing a 25-year power purchase agreement, and construction's expected to start this year, and it's expected to start generating in 2022. And last but not least is one of the largest solar projects in not just the region, but the world. So the Al Dhafra Solar PV2 project is forecast to generate around 2 gigawatts of power. Was awarded to a consortium of Abu Dhabi National Energy Company, TAQA, T-A-Q-A, and Masdar, with partners EDF and Jinko Power, located about 35 kilometers from Abu Dhabi city, and resulting in, at the time, one of the lowest PV prices in the world at 1.4 cents per kilowatt hour. So incredibly cheap. Expected to produce power for around about 160,000 households across the UAE, and is, again, almost twice the size of TAQA's existing Noor Al Dhabi Abu Dhabi solar plant, which is about 1.2 gigawatts, which is currently the world's largest single solar PV plant. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on to Dubai, and Dubai and some of the other Emirates such as Sharjah also have a range of utilities at different stages of development. Again, I won't focus too much on those that are already been commissioned, but it's safe to say that the largest plant in Dubai is the Jebel Ali facility with combined capacity of about 7.8 gigawatts, including the newest addition to that, which is the Jebel Ali M facility, which came online, I think, towards the end of 2018, with 2 gigawatts of power and 140 million gallons per day of water. There's also a Hassayan site, and I've got to say I'm less familiar with this site, but that, again, there's a new facility forecast to come online in 2023, which is a clean coal power plant, which began in 2016. And combined with that, there's also a Utico seawater reverse osmosis plant, which will create around 120 million gallons per day as well. And that is due to come online in around about 2024. And then there's, in Dubai, there's solar, of course, and the one that gets the big headlines is the Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Solar Park. So that's been developed over 3 phases. The first phase, which became operational in 2013, was just relatively small, so 13 megawatts of power coming from around 150,000 PV cells. The second phase was much bigger, at 200 megawatts of power, which came online in 2017 from 2.3 million PV solar panels, covering an area of about 4.5 square kilometers, so a huge area covered there. Again, prices at the time were competitive at about 5.6 cents per kilowatt hour. And then most recently, phase 3 has also been coming online as well. Started in 2016. The first phase of that, first 200 megawatts of that came online in 2018. And the second and third parts of that phase 3 will be coming online throughout this year, early next year. The total capacity for phase 3 is another 800 megawatts of power. So you can see that the whole scheme is well over 1 gigawatts of solar power for the Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Solar Park. And then one that's a little less well known, I think, is the Hatta Dam project, which is one of the first hydroelectric projects in the region. Slated to begin operations in February 2024. We'll obviously use water that's stored in the Hatta Dam and will generate around 250 megawatts of power with a lifespan of around about 80 years. So that one will be around for a while and developed by a consortium with EDF, the French company. Next slide, please. But there are also, in addition to the major projects, there are also a range of sort of smaller scale projects that are also starting to be developed as well. And as Ewan mentioned, waste is one of the feedstocks for some of these newer implementations. And Tadweer is a good example of that. So Tadweer is Abu Dhabi's waste management center. And they're running a couple of projects at the moment. One is a solar project to power their construction demolition waste facility. So they've recently announced phase 2 of that project, which is aiming to power 90% of that facility. And then perhaps the one that we'll spend a little bit more time talking about is the waste to fuel work. So Tadweer has access to around 1.3 million tons of residual waste every year. As you've seen, there's not really any shortage of electricity in the UAE, especially with the Al Baraka nuclear plant coming online. So they were looking for alternative products that they could generate from waste that wasn't electricity, but perhaps was something else. So they started to investigate the feasibility of producing initially jet fuel, but potentially other types of fuel as well. And that was with other sort of consortium partners, ADNOC, who's the refining company in Abu Dhabi, and also Etihad Airways, obviously would be the off-taker for any jet fuel. Next slide, please. So just taking a step back, so why are waste to fuel projects increasingly popular at the moment? Well, there's huge interest in them for a number of reasons, but not least because they really are a way of providing or killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So you can generate a commodity that has value, but also reduce the amount of waste that's perhaps going to landfill or other polluting areas. So across the world, we're seeing a large increase in these types of projects, taking different types of feedstock, including in the UK, with a number of demonstration projects in the UK, but also now moving into full kind of commercial scale operations in places like Holland, Canada, and also the UK as well. And very often, as I say, these projects are done in collaboration with other companies or industries. Particularly the airline industry is of interest. Obviously, they're going through absolute mayhem at the moment. So it remains to see what will happen in that industry. But legislation such as Corsia, which will come online in 2022, is incentivizing airlines to use alternative fuels from that date forward. And that is generating some of the interest in perhaps producing a type of jet fuel, kerosene, from waste. So next slide, please. So for Tadweer, one of the projects that we've completed recently for Tadweer was this feasibility study looking at whether jet fuel or some other type of fuel, whether it's ethanol or methanol, is commercially viable in Abu Dhabi. So we completed that study about a year ago, and they're now moving into the tendering phase and starting to tender for different types of, from different providers to start proposing different options to take that study forward. I think there's a little bit of a hiatus on that project at the moment because they're waiting for some regulatory guidance from the Ministry of Climate Change here in Dubai, but I'm sure that will move forward. So perhaps now is a good time to start looking at that one and getting involved if you're interested in that area. And then finally, last slide, please. Just to wrap up, in summary, so there's still plenty of activity in the UAE and across the GCC utility markets. And certainly, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is another market that will provide a whole raft of new opportunities if you're looking at moving into the region. There are a lot of projects that have already started or already under contract, but that doesn't mean there aren't opportunities at different stages of the project's life cycle, sort of further down the time frame. Renewables and smaller off-grid projects are certainly on the rise, and as I say, largely because they kill two birds with one stone, and waste, as Ewan said, is becoming a key focus area for this region. And then I guess the normal qualifiers apply. So if you're looking at this region, trying to do business here, obviously innovation helps, both to differentiate you in the marketplace and as a protection against the commoditization of pricing. Slightly analogously, a track record also builds trust and confidence. So, in many cases, the innovation and the track record don't always go hand in hand. But certainly, if you've done something somewhere else before, that's much more likely to get you through the door than if you're trying to propose something brand new in this region. And lastly, you still need to be price aware. So even if you are bringing the kind of the latest and greatest, it's unlikely that you'll be able to charge huge price premiums. In many cases, we're seeing projects where clients are looking for good enough and not always absolute international best practice. Very happy to take questions at the end of this or even after the session as required. But again, thank you all for attending.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Akin. I think you just sort of reinforced a couple of points you made there. I mean, the UAE, by the looks of it is trying to harness solar energy, hydro energy, waste to energy now to a very large extent. So it's quite interesting to see how things go ahead. I have a question here from Mark, and again, you might perhaps be able to. So I will just take one quick question from Mark here. Mark asks if they are looking for any large-scale electricity storage projects to turn intermittent renewable generation into dispatchable supply. If you can make out what that means. I mean, it means not much to me, to be perfectly honest. But I leave it to you to answer that question.
Okay, yeah, great question, Mark. Look, I'm not aware of any specific projects or specific tenders that are out for that at the moment, but I do know that like across the rest of the world, storage is becoming increasingly relevant. So if you've got a storage solution, then yes, that's definitely something that will be of interest to the market out here, definitely.
Yeah, and feel free to. Yeah, sorry, go on, Ewan.
Yeah, again, I suppose what me and Akin have highlighted so far, it's still very much in its infancy in this market. There is still a reliance on hydrocarbons, but we're having more and more conversations with local governments around renewable energies as a whole. And one topic that does come up more often than not, or two, sorry, is hydrogen and battery storage. So I mentioned earlier Masdar, the renewable energy company based in Abu Dhabi. They are very much interested in companies that have expertise within battery storage. So yeah, Mark, if you want to reach out to me, please do. I'd be happy to take that conversation further.
Perfect. Mark says not batteries, CAES. So if that,
So energy storage. Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, yes, regardless of the technology, certainly energy storage is something that will be important out here, as it is globally.
All right, great. Thanks for that again. So we'll now move on to our next speaker. We have Jims now waiting on the wings. Jims is the commercial director for Pro Partner Group, also one of our partners back in Abu Dhabi, and he will now talk you through the very many company setup structures. Obviously, all over the news across the world, there's been a lot of talk about the change in the ownership structure and what that looks like also here in the UAE. So I believe James will be touching on that as well. James, over to you. And yeah.
Thanks, Vinitha. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. There is only 15 minutes to talk, so I have left a lot of detail in the slides, and people obviously are very welcome to take the slides away, ask questions at the end. As Ewan and Aiken both mentioned, obviously this is quite a wide sector, so I'm looking to create a wide overview. It's quite a broad brush approach. Each individual setup requirement in each emirate and each structure and each location will require specific information. So we'll have to drill down into more detail at a later stage, but I'm very much going to try and take a general view just to talk about how companies can land themselves here, how they can do business in the UAE in this particular sector. So next slide, please, Abby. The outline, I'll introduce Pro Partner Group briefly. We will talk about the two particular options when people and companies are looking to enter the UAE, whether that's an agency option or whether that's a physical presence. And then we'll talk about the key questions that companies need to ask themselves that will color the decision-making process as to how to set up, which location. Then the different options, free zones versus mainland. There are a lot of free zones here. There's a lot of talk about what can and can't be done within those free zones, and what companies need to be in the mainland and what part of the mainland, which emirate specifically. And then we'll talk about the differences between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. I will talk about the new 100% ownership rules. The laws have changed and they were updated as early as last week. So again, with a lot of things that Ewan and Aiken was saying, the UAE really is looking towards the business environment to make it more progressive, make it less bureaucratic and less costly, and reduce the risk for foreign companies coming in. So we're really seeing some welcome changes in the business environment with regard to setting up. I will then talk briefly about the regulatory considerations. Obviously, lots of different sectors, lots of different regulatory bodies and different areas to talk about. Will require more detail in the future, but I'll touch on that. And then just the final 2 points, talking about how you get your staff here on the ground, sponsoring families, setting up bank accounts, and those kind of practical tips for companies and individuals coming to the region. So Pro Partner Group, who are we? We were founded in 2010 here in Abu Dhabi. We have around 50 staff, Abu Dhabi, Dubai. We also cover Oman and Qatar. We are a full service company formation and ongoing support provider. As Vinitha mentioned, we do operate the BCB UK incubator in Abu Dhabi to help UK companies with the soft landing in Abu Dhabi specifically. We work directly with companies, a lot of companies in the UK, but also all over the world. But we also work with professional services firms such as law firms and audit companies, and we can act in that indirect way. If companies come with a law firm, we can act to undertake a lot of the formation while working in tandem with the law firm to ensure the legal elements of the agency agreement or the company formation and the legal documents are robustly in place so that the company can deliver the products and services that they need to on the ground. Broadly, we just simply eliminate the stress and complexity of setting up. There are a lot of options on how to set up here. We try and cut through that and provide the best route to market for companies in looking to what they want to achieve here. Next slide, please, Abby. So these are just a list of our services, company setup, that's in the mainland or in the various free zones. We also operate what's called corporate nominee sponsorship. So some of you will be familiar with the concept that with a limited liability company in the UAE, a majority, currently a 51% shareholding has to be held by an Emirati national or a UAE-owned company. Pro Partner Group act as a nominee in that respect. So that's a platform to allow foreign companies to come to the region and have a secure partner. We pass all the control to the foreign party, and it provides a much more secure way of getting into the market. We also then provide what are called PRO services, which are essentially visas, immigration, labor, security passes, regulatory approvals, and all the things that companies may need to get staff on the ground in those locations that they need to. We also have a suite of additional services which cover things like special purpose vehicles, CISPA passes, and other things which we can talk about later on. Next slide, please, Abby, thank you. So this is the question about agency versus setup, and I will kind of gloss over the agency element and then talk in more detail about the company setup side, but we'll just touch on agency. And this depends whether obviously you're delivering products, selling products, or delivering services. The quickest route to market that people often find is to find an existing company that will buy their products and sell them as a commercial agent or a distribution agent in the UAE. And this very much is a very quick route to market. It's a lot of historical companies have done it this way. The agent effectively becomes the owner of the products here in the UAE, and then they will be responsible for distributing them. They are also responsible for registering the products in certain cases. It's a much quicker route to market, as I said, and less costly to set up. The arrangements are normally then based on a percentage of revenue, largely. But I would caution any company looking at the commercial agency route that commercial agency agreements in the UAE and regionally are very difficult to revoke. So always be cautious when you're talking to agencies, and you'll find some of the bigger agency companies have a lot of perhaps competing products. They will have other companies that do the same thing as you do, both from a service and a product perspective. Just be careful that you do your own research on the agency if you're going into these arrangements. Also, if you're putting staff on the ground, you will have to then, those staff will have to be visaed against the agent, and the agent therefore then employs those staff and owns, in inverted commas, those staff. So again, you lose an element of control. There is also some risk with intellectual property and assets and everything else. So always take legal advice when you're looking at commercial agency arrangements. The second option obviously is to go and get your own company, put a full footprint down, and there are several ways of doing that. Obviously, that's a higher cost when you're setting up, because you'll have to have an office, you have to have, there are government licensing fees. It's a lot more expensive to set up in the UAE, although that is improving. However, there are mechanisms that you can use either through the free zone or through a corporate nominee structure that will ensure that you can fully control your assets and your brand, full control of your P&L with a clear exit strategy. So the full setup option provides much more autonomy for companies coming in and looking at these two different options. Next slide, please, Abby. We'll skip over this slide briefly. This lists the company formation options broadly, and this is from a structural perspective. So a limited liability company, a foreign branch, trade rep office, professional services license, or a free zone company. We'll come on to them in a little bit of detail in a minute. Next slide, please. So these are the key questions, and I recommend that any company coming to the region asks these questions to color the decision-making as to how to set up and where to set up. We'll go through them briefly. So the first question is, what products and services are you going to sell here? What activities are you going to undertake? And the reason I say that is that activities are strictly regulated within certain verticals within the UAE. There's a regulatory body for particular activities. So no matter what you do as a company in the UK, if you're looking to deliver a particular product or service here, you will have to choose from a list of activities within the Department of Economic Development of each emirate, and that activity will then perhaps trigger a regulatory requirement. So it's important to identify the activities you're looking to undertake here, because you may need to be located in a particular area. A couple of examples of this. If you're dealing with oil and gas, or you're dealing with Abu Dhabi utilities or any of the power projects in Abu Dhabi, you certainly will have to set up in Abu Dhabi. You couldn't do that from Dubai. You'll have to obtain perhaps Supreme Petroleum Council approval, You'll have to register as an ad hoc vendor, and that will require you to be in the mainland. You cannot be in a free zone. The other thing to mention about free zones is that staff members in the free zone do not get Ministry of Labour files. So those staff members will not be able to go on site or into people's places of work if they're in the mainland or in a government office, etc. So that's an important question to ask. Question 2 about, are those activities regulated? Are you going to be undertaking any engineering or architectural design? That may need to be classified. You may need to undertake municipality classification in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. And again, do you need ad hoc registration? That's often a big one with utilities and the oil and gas sector in Abu Dhabi. That will need an Abu Dhabi setup. Question 3, who are the potential clients? And that's linked to 1 and 2. Are they government entities, private companies, oil and gas, or are they located internationally? And are you just basing yourself in the UAE as a base to sell regionally? The decisions there, if you're looking at government or you're looking at companies in mainland UAE, a free zone won't work. You'll have to set up in the mainland. But if you're looking internationally or you're using it as a sales base or you're a service provider, then a free zone may be suitable. And there are about 45 free zones across the UAE with different sectors and different remits, which we'll talk about in a minute. Question 4, who will be the shareholders? Who will own the company? Will you branch from the UK company? Will you set up a new entity with individual shareholders? That's an important question because it will dictate the speed with which you can establish. If you're setting up a branch of your UK company or a subsidiary, you will have to get all the documents from the UK, the constitutional documents, as well as board resolutions, powers of attorney, legalized, notarized, and attested through the UAE embassy to be legal in the UAE. You will have to put someone on the ground with the relevant powers. All those powers will have to be legally translated, stamped, Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Foreign Affairs approved. And that is quite a long process as part of the formation process. So it's worth considering how you're going to set up and how you're going to structure yourself. And there are other considerations related to ultimate beneficial ownership and opening bank accounts that may be important when you're thinking about the shareholders or how you're structuring the business here. Question 5, do you need specific commercial space? Are you wanting to be based in Dubai for a specific reason? Or do you need a specific commercial space because of your activity? You know, light industrial, warehousing. The space that you have will often dictate the amount of staff you could have, the labor quota. So it is a function. If you have a larger space, you can have a larger number of staff. The Ministry of Labour will come and inspect your space if you need a larger quota, and they may ask you to rent larger office space. So it's important to think about question 6 as well. How many employees do you think you will need in the next 12 months to plan out you know, what you will need from a cost perspective in terms of office? Will a small office suffice, or will you need to start with a larger potential space, and where will that potential space need to be located? So those are the 6 key questions that all companies should look at. The physical presence options, again, this can get quite complicated, but I'm just going to distill it down to 3 main options. Limited liability company, foreign branch, or free zone. So a limited liability company and foreign branch, by that I mean in the mainland, and by the mainland I mean any of the Emirates. Ewan set out the map of the Emirates there. Well, let's talk about Abu Dhabi and Dubai. You can set up a limited liability company in Abu Dhabi, and you can set up a limited liability company in Dubai. You cannot necessarily do business across both Emirates with one LLC or foreign branch in one Emirate. So it's important to consider where your target market is going to be. The limited liability company is the access all areas. It's a true local UAE company, limited by shares, obviously. There's no share requirement, no share capital requirement to be deposited. Normally between 150 and 200,000 dirhams is listed as a share capital, but that does not have to be deposited in the bank. It can be used as working capital. There are a number of management options. The profit share ratio can be adjusted. It's a fairly flexible option. However, under current commercial companies law in the UAE, 51% has to be majority owned by a UAE national or a UAE owned company. So this is what is potentially changing now over this year. However, currently there are ways to mitigate that anyway, using a company like ours, Pro Partner Group, as a corporate nominee for that 51%. We would pass control to the 49 to create an effective 100% owned LLC by the UK company. And then The UK company is given full management rights. You can sell our shares, vote on our behalf, and there's a number of other protections that we put in place to ensure that the foreign entity has full control. And if the rules do change, we will pass the nominee shares back to the principal at that time. So it does provide a route. So the LLC option is the one that has the widest range of activities. You can undertake trading, importing, as well as all engineering and contracting activities within an LLC. The foreign branch option is an extension of the mother company. It's a branch of the UK company. It's 100% owned in the UAE, but likewise, 100% liability rests with the UK, and tax is paid in the UK. Tax is accounted for in the UK, so there isn't as much tax benefit to setting up a foreign branch as there is with an LLC. There's a 50,000 dirham bank guarantee required to be deposited with the Ministry of Economy, and currently you need to nominate a local agent. So again, that can be an individual Emirati or an Emirati company, like Pro Partner Group, for example. That again is changing. So we expect that the rules on requiring a national service agent may change over the next 6 months to a year. And that's coming through the new amendment to the Commercial Companies Law. So again, that's good news. A foreign branch cannot trade, it cannot import, it cannot undertake contracting activities, but it can provide services, maintenance, and consultancy, and that kind of those kind of activity ranges. So there are limits on what the foreign branch can do from an activity perspective. The last section to talk about quickly are the free zones. So as I said, 45 free zones across the UAE, various sectors. You probably will all have heard of the logistics free zones, Jabal Ali, Kizad. There are also the financial free zones, DIFC, ADGM, as well as media free zones, renewable energy free zones. I think Aiken mentioned Masdar, healthcare, that kind of thing. So the free zones are their own jurisdiction. They're not considered within the UAE. You can set up 100% owned in the free zone. Strictly speaking, you're not really supposed to be doing business with the mainland when you're in a free zone. However, if you're undertaking services virtually, there is a bit of a gray area. We do see a lot of free zone companies continuing to undertake business with the UAE mainland. However, you won't qualify for government work. So you won't pre-qualify for ADNOC, DWA, ADWA, any of those elements. And as I said before, if you're hiring staff in the free zone, those staff members do not get Ministry of Labour files, so they don't officially get a UAE work permit. So they're not strictly allowed to go into other people's places of work or go on site. So there are restrictions related to the free zone. However, free zones are a lot less expensive, they're cheaper to set up, and particularly with 1 or 2 visas, you can rent a virtual office, so you don't need a physical space. Whereas with the LLC and the foreign branch in the mainland, you will need a physical space that is inspected, so that the costs early on can be lower with a free zone setup. Next slide, please, Abby. So this, again, is going into more detail about the differences between the LLC and the foreign branch. I won't touch on this, but there is more detail there for people to take away. We'll move to the next slide, please, Abby. Again, this is, we have limited time here, but this is an example of a company formation flowchart for an LLC. And I bring this up just because we want to illustrate a couple of things that are important within this, as well as asking the questions that I mentioned, questions 1 to 6. You've made the decision on where you want to set up. There are a number of steps within here that you need to be aware of. The first step is the documentation. So it's really important that you understand who the shareholders are going to be and how the company is going to be structured and how it's going to be managed. And then you will have to make sure those documents are all in place from the UK. The relevant powers are given through in the board resolution and the power of attorney, and all those documents are prepared through the UAE embassy, translated and ready, because they will need to be presented at the notary public here in the UAE in order to incorporate the company. So the first point to make in this flowchart is it's really important that companies are prepared with the documentation in place to ensure that the setup can run smoothly. Once the company has all the documentation in place, sorry, I haven't quite got off that one yet. There are several departments. The Department of Economic Development is the one that dictates licensing in all of the Emirates. You reserve your trade name there, you obtain initial approval, and then, as I say, you go to the notary public. Part of the formation process is the Department of Economic Development will inspect your office space. They will also check if you need any regulatory approvals. So that is dictated by your activity. At that stage, if all that is approved, they've inspected your office, everything's fine, they will issue your trade license. So at that point, you are then incorporated and you go off and set up your bank account. But at the same time, then you approach the Ministry of Labour and the Immigration Department to register with those two departments. And that then allows you to start hiring staff and issuing visas and obtaining labour quota. So you can see the process flow is one that goes through the licensing authority to the Labour and Immigration Department, and then you can start hiring staff and really taking on and mobilising those staff in country. So next slide, please, Abby. We'll move over this one as well. I've already touched on the two differences. When you're talking about sponsorship, you can choose an individual Emirati, but I would always recommend choose a corporate entity, choose a common law jurisdiction. We often use ADGM, which is Abu Dhabi Global Markets here in Abu Dhabi, which has a British court structure within it. And a lot of the documents and law can be referred to back to the UK. It's a much more robust legal structure. But again, always take legal advice. There's a good comparison chart here for you to have a look at later. Next slide, please, Abby. So last week, this is all very topical. In November, it was a very surprise announcement. The very higher elements of the Executive Council of the UAE came out and said, right, enough's enough. We're allowing foreign companies to own everything 100%. There was a lot of headlines in the press. Last week, the amendment came out, or the headline of the amendment came out, and it is very good news. So they are moving towards increased ownership. So it's up to 100%. But what the Executive Council is doing is they're allowing each emirate to make the decision. They've mentioned that certain strategic activities will still be restricted, and we expect, unfortunately, that will catch sectors like oil and gas, infrastructure, critical infrastructure areas, engineering and construction will likely have some restriction on them and need some form of local ownership. So again, a corporate nominee is probably the solution there. But each emirate will get to decide what percentage and how to roll that out. So over the next 6 months to a year, we expect to see more information coming through on that. It's very positive. It means that we'll see a lot of companies come out of the free zones into the mainland. We'll see a lot of companies coming into the UAE because this will reduce the risk for them to having that local partner, reducing a lot of the red tape to set up. So it's a very welcome move. And as we can see, the UAE is really wanting to encourage companies from all over the world to come here and make it a really a good business environment. So it's a really positive move. Next slide, please, Abby. I'll touch on the regulatory considerations. They're probably too wide to go overall here, but I mentioned earlier about location dependent. So when you ask yourself the question about your particular activity, you'll need to look at what regulation may be caught or what regulation may come in relation to that particular activity. Oil and gas, which is obviously quite general, but also can encompass utilities, will encompass water treatment plants, will encompass onshore and offshore areas, CISPA areas, critical infrastructure areas, power stations, and that kind of thing. They will all need ADNOC approval, which is essentially something called Supreme Petroleum Council. In order for companies to obtain Supreme Petroleum Council, they will need to be set up in the mainland in Abu Dhabi. That will also then allow them to register as a vendor within ADNOC's vendor system, and that's a vendor for any type of service, whether that's engineering or setting up a sandwich shop on an oil rig. You would need to get that ADNOC vendor registration approval. So again, it needs to come back to those questions. Think about your activity, think about your location, and that will color the decision-making process as to where you start with the formation. There is an in-country value regime that was set up in Abu Dhabi across the UAE, and that is part of the ADNOC tendering process. Your higher ICV score will put you higher up the ranking when compared with a like-for-like tender. That is a function of how much money you invest in the UAE. We see a lot of companies moving out of the free zones internationally, putting light industrial and investing in the mainland to get their ICV scores higher. And so there's an audit that's required for ICV, and that's undertaken annually, and then your scoring is done if you're, if that's something that you really need to be looking at. CISPA passes or security passes, again, is something to consider because, again, it will need an Abu Dhabi-based company. Those staff will need to be visaed against that Abu Dhabi-based company in order to get the security passes. So that's something to think about. Construction and infrastructure regulation, I mentioned before about municipality classification in both Abu Dhabi and Dubai. If you're looking at that kind of work in Dubai, you'll need to be registered in Dubai and register with Dubai municipality. If you're looking to provide consultants and services and manpower, if you like, again, you'll need to look at the location. If you're looking at government entities in Abu Dhabi, you'll need to be based in Abu Dhabi and vice versa. Also look at your products. Will those products need to be registered? What body will register them? And again, some products may require civil defense approvals. Some may need to be registered with an Emirati commercial agent to be approved. So that's something to look at if you're a trading company. Next slide, please. So final two slides here, just on a staffing considerations and HR. People can come and visit the UAE on a tourist visa. Obviously, UK citizens get 30 days. And we often see a lot of UK people on the Oman border doing the U-turn, although we used to, maybe during COVID, we won't see that as much now. But that is renewable, so you leave and come back and your tourist visa can roll. But ultimately, if you're going to be doing work here, you need to have a resident visa. You need to have a work permit. So that can either be against another company, if you're using the agency route, or if you're setting up your own company, that could be in a free zone or it could be in the mainland. But there is a process of obtaining a resident visa, and that gives you the ability to work in the UAE. In the mainland, there is something called the wage protection system. So when you set up a company in the mainland, everyone's work permit, everyone's work contract is registered with the Ministry of Labour. The salary level per month, as well as all the benefits, is listed within the Ministry of Labour. And then salaries need to be cleared through that central payment system. So companies need to be sure that they're registered with that system and staff are paid correctly. The resident visa takes about 2 weeks and people need to stay in country for those 2 weeks. The visa involves a medical and biometrics. When you get your ID card, there's a biometric chip in there. The cost of a visa is around £1,500 all in. In the mainland, it's a 2-year visa, which is renewable after 2 years. And in the free zones, you get a 3-year visa. Everything here that you get, so a personal bank account, mobile phone, renting accommodation, needs a resident visa. So everything needs to happen from that point. So you need to consider putting people on the ground, how to get them a visa to get them established. You may have staff members who want to sponsor family members. They want to bring wives or husbands and children with them. That can be done once the primary is visaed, and then the other individuals below that individual are then sponsored by that individual. So you get the first person, their visa, and then the other individuals are visaed against that person. There is a threshold requirement to be able to sponsor your family, and that needs a specific salary level and a specific job title. So you need to think about the job titles of your staff members, and qualifications may need to be legalized and attested in the UK for use in the UAE if those are engineering qualifications or managerial level qualifications. So again, location is important. Job titles are important for role considerations, and where the staff member is working will be important as to where they're able to go, and obviously set up their own personal affairs in the UAE as well. Next slide, please, Abby. So yeah, the final points, just consider those key questions when you're planning to set up the company. Go through them. Have a think about those staff and personnel matters. The location of the visas are important, and where you're delivering your services or your products. Prepare the documents correctly. Think about what documents you will need to prepare. Take legal advice on whatever corporate structure you're choosing, or whether you're going to a commercial agency arrangement. Banking considerations are also important. If you have a complicated corporate structure, the UAE banking finds it very difficult to look through the UBOs, or the ultimate beneficial owners. So you will also, if you have a complicated corporate structure in the UK, for example, and you're coming to set up here, you'll probably need to get all of the corporate shareholders above a certain percentage. You'll have to get all those constitutional documents legalized and ready for the UK in order to have no trouble setting up a local bank account here. And a UAE resident visa is required for individual bank accounts. There is a new set of rules as well here called the economic substance rules, and this is linked to tax. The UAE has brought in or embraced economic substance in order to get itself off the UAE tax haven, the EU tax haven blacklist. And that, in summary, that's just to ensure that the company that is doing business here and is channeling revenue in the UAE is doing so with enough substance. So it's not avoiding tax in any way. So companies coming here will have to ensure that they conform to the economic substance rules as well. And obviously there's VAT now in the UAE, but there is no other tax apart from import duty. So have a look at all those elements when you're considering a setup. And I'll be happy to take questions on any of those matters. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Thank you very much for that, James. I mean, to me, the golden nugget of your presentation were those 6 questions, really, more than anything. I mean, that I think should be the driving factor for a lot of companies when they're looking to set up in the UAE. And we've obviously run short on time here, but what I will do is, and there have been quite a few questions that have come in, pertaining to regulatory constraints to delivering virtual training from the UK to the UAE, and I can pick that up. So we've had, again, quite a few companies that we've worked with in the past that have been providing virtual training. And again, for a lot of these companies, it really boils down to what the client wants. So, and their procurement practices. So if the client mandates that you need to have a local trade license, then and if that contract is worth that much to you, then James is your man there to go to in terms of what that setup structure should look like in order to get that signature on that dotted line as quickly as possible. However, there are other clients who have absolutely no problem dealing with their vendors, no matter what part of the world they're in. And they could very well be invoicing from back in the UK or wherever else. But I guess what I'm trying to say, it really comes down to the procurement practice of that particular client that you're dealing with, really, more than anything. So, I mean, on that, I'm going to conclude this session. Thank you very much to all the speakers for joining us today. I'm afraid we haven't been able to take too many questions, but we will be trying to answer most of those questions when we come back to you with the deck and the presentation. And we hope you found this session useful. As you will have noticed, we have chosen our speakers very, very carefully. I mean, if you are looking at the sector here in the UAE, UN is your man to go to. After which, if you want to know more about some very specific projects, Akin is who you should be speaking to. And should you eventually want to, set up here in the UAE, then James is the one to go to. But thank you very much, everyone. And I will be closing this session now. Thanks. Bye, everyone.